breaking news. Will the government shut down? We're live on Capitol Hill. The vote that just happened. The Senate now scrambling to vote on a funding bill that would keep the government open after Democrats removed a debt limit increase Republicans refused to back. President Biden abruptly canceling a trip to Chicago with Thursday's deadline quickly approaching, and as his own party remains at odds over the president's multi-trillion-dollar agenda. Chuck Todd joins Top Story. Also breaking tonight, a judge has removed the father of Britney Spears from her conservatorship. Her father holding that role for the last 13 years in a situation Britney has called abusive, saying he prevented her from getting married, having children, and living freely. Now, what comes next for the pop star? Plus, the warning for pregnant women. The new guidance from the CDC after data shows expectant mothers are at a higher risk of dying from COVID-19. This as a battle continues between workers and employees over vaccine mandates. Hospitals in several states now facing staffing shortages after laying off healthcare workers who refuse to get their shots. United now set to terminate hundreds of employees, a pilots union saying it will lead to travel disruptions. Forced to return are Jacob Soboroff on the ground in Port-au-Prince tonight as expulsion flights from the U.S. land back in Haiti, carrying thousands of migrants who had to try to flee the country. The chilling new twist in the disappearance of Mia Marcano. Authorities saying a master key was used to enter the 19-year-old's apartment on the night she vanished. What we just learned about her building's maintenance man.
Sit down. Just sit down.
And the disturbing video showing officers tasing a deaf man and throwing him to the ground when he could not hear their commands. Tonight, how that man is trying to seek justice. Top Story starts right now. And good evening, I'm Tom Llamas. We begin Top Story tonight with the government on the verge of a shutdown, with funding set to run out in just over 24 hours if Congress fails to act. Lawmakers on Capitol Hill now racing to vote on a short-term funding bill. Both the Senate and House will need to pass it by tomorrow ahead of a deadline at midnight. If not, it would be the third government shutdown in just 3 years, with millions of federal workers at risk of losing pay during a pandemic. National parks, food stamps, benefits, and airports all impacted. President Biden canceling a trip to Chicago today as the shutdown looms, and as a division in his own party could put the president's $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill in jeopardy. And just moments ago, House Democrats voting to suspend the debt limit until December 2022. That bill now heads to the Senate. Garrett Hake on Capitol Hill tonight to break it all down for the story.
Tonight, lawmakers racing to prevent a government shutdown. Both chambers needing to vote to extend funding by midnight Thursday.
Democrats don't want to shut down the government. Republicans don't want to shut down the government.
This would be a shutdown of stupidity.
Democrats who control Congress planning a vote in the Senate to avoid a shutdown as soon as tonight, with no opposition expected. Meanwhile, President Biden canceling a planned trip to Chicago to remain in Washington, focusing on breaking an impasse between moderate and progressive Democrats that's threatening to derail his agenda. A Thursday House vote on the trillion-dollar bipartisan infrastructure bill now in jeopardy, with progressives planning to block it without a deal to advance Democrats' $3.5 trillion social and climate policy bill, too. Key moderate Joe Manchin says that bill costs too much and the bipartisan bill should pass first.
The bipartisan infrastructure bill does so much in so many ways. Clean energy, everything we talked about. Why wouldn't we take that as a win? And move on and negotiate good faith?
House progressive Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez pushing back.
96%, myself included, of the Democratic Party is in agreement that we need to pass both bills.
He said he's still negotiating in good faith to get there.
Let's stick to the original plan. I will support Manchin's priorities. He can support my priorities, and we can all win. And working families can get child care, health care, climate action, and infrastructure investment.
But Congress' first order of business remains funding the government, making sure that after Friday, federal employees like IRS analyst Crystal Kirkpatrick in Utah will keep drawing a paycheck.
This isn't politics. This is my kids' groceries. This is making sure that everyone in my house is fed and happy and clothed, and you just can't mess with that.
The human face to a massive problem right there. Garrett Hake joins us now from Capitol Hill. Garrett, we've had some late-breaking news, I know, on the debt limit, the government's ability to continue to borrow money, but walk our viewers through how this exactly fits in.
Yeah, Tom, the House just passed an extension of the debt limit that would go through the end of next year, but that bill's already dead on arrival in the Senate. There, Republicans have the votes to block it, and they are demanding that Democrats raise the debt limit by some unspecified amount in the trillions on their own without any Republican votes. They want them to do that through their reconciliation process to make it as painful politically for Democrats as possible. But the deadline for default, a national default, is now just 19 days away. Looks like Congress is going to use almost every one of those days before they come up with a solution, Tom.
Garrett Haight covering all the action there for us on Capitol Hill. Garrett, thank you. As Congress stalls on critical parts of the Biden agenda and stares down a government shutdown, I want to bring in Chuck Todd, moderator of NBC's Meet the Press and NBC News political director, to talk us through this. Chuck, watching all of this from here in New York, it sort of feels like we're watching this poker game play out, except all the players are Democrats. I'm wondering who has the best hand at the table, but also can Joe Biden get someone like Senator Joe Manchin and AOC to a place where they're both happy?
Well, he has to, right? This is his job. This is the leader of the party. This was the debate that was had in the Democratic primaries, by the way, that Joe Biden won. He won the debate that said, hey, I'm the guy that can wrangle everything. I'm the guy that can sort of make Washington functional again. So I do think it has to be him.
I want to get your take on another big moment that happened this week. Here's a clip. This is what the president told ABC in August about the withdrawal of Afghanistan and his decisions and recommendations on that, and what the head of Central Command told the Senate committee just yesterday.
So no one told, your military advisors did not tell you, no, we should just keep 2,500 troops. It's been a stable situation for the last several years. We can do that. We can continue to do that.
No one said that to me that I can recall.
I recommended that we maintain 2,500 troops in Afghanistan. And I also recommended earlier in the fall of 2020 that we maintain 4,500 at that time. Those are my personal views. I also have a view that the withdrawal of those forces would lead inevitably to the collapse of the Afghan military forces and eventually the Afghan government.
So, Chuck, you mentioned the campaign, and the president then did campaign on bringing integrity and truth back to the White House. How do you judge this moment?
Look, I think it's been a tough moment. On Afghanistan, that's not the only, this is the second, arguably, sort of what he said and what we're hearing don't appear to match. For instance, he said, look, this is not going to look like Saigon 1975. Well, it did turn out to look like that. Some might argue it was worse at times. So I don't think there's any harm. And in many ways, General Milley, the military advisor, and McKenzie have both actually been almost defending the president's role in this, that, hey, they're the military. This is civilian control. He made a decision. They followed the orders. I'm mildly surprised that, in hindsight, why President Biden didn't tell our friend, Mr. Stephanopoulos, look, yes, there were people advising me to keep troops there. I decided that wasn't the right call. Look, it's not just on Afghanistan, Tom. On COVID and booster shots, there's been confusion at times, or misleading remarks, or in hindsight, they look misleading. So this is something I think they need to clean up. I think it has had a significant impact on his poll numbers, though.
Yeah, and I think this week we're going to learn a lot about the bandwidth of this White House, because they're dealing, as you mentioned, with immigration, COVID, this budget battle, his domestic agenda, Afghanistan. Do you think they have the bandwidth?
Well, if they don't, it's going to be a disaster for the Democratic Party. He's got a lot of seasoned individuals around him in that West Wing. Joe Biden himself has been through these Washington wars for decades. So on paper, and in fact, that's what they sold the public, which is why, Tom, I think he's being judged so harshly by independents. If you look at his poll numbers, the drop is coming from one group of voters. It's independent voters. These were the folks who were the last ones on Team Biden. They were the ones that said, oof, I don't like what Trump's doing. And in many ways, they chose Biden sort of as an anti-Trump. But that means they were going to be, even tougher of a grader on him when it came to issues like credibility, competency, and making Washington functional.
Chuck Todd for us tonight. Chuck, we thank you for your analysis. We also want to turn to some other breaking news we're following tonight. The father of Britney Spears has been removed from her conservatorship. A judge making the ruling just moments ago, ending the 13-year arrangement the pop star called abusive. Her dedicated fans awaiting the decision outside the courtroom in Los Angeles. NBC's Emilia Keita was also there.
Tell Jamie now. Tonight, decision day for Britney Spears, the judge freeing the pop star's finances of her father's control.
Feels like winning.
A long-awaited win for the Free Britney movement, organized by fans online, which helps spotlight her 13-year conservatorship.
The conservatorship has got to go.
It's been 13 long years of fighting for this girl's life. And finally today, he's gone. For the first time in 13 years, we have hope. Finally.
The judge removed her father, Jamie Spears, as conservator, handing the reins to accountant John Zabel at the request of Britney's legal team.
We hope the best for your daughter, sir.
The development falls on the heels of an explosive New York Times documentary detailing allegations that Jamie and some members of his team monitor Britney's every move, even mirroring her phone and recording audio of her bedroom.
Her intimate relations were closely managed.
How you doing, Britney?
You know, Britney could not have someone in the privacy of her house without those three people knowing.
In court filings, Britney's attorney calling her father's alleged actions an unconscionable and disgraceful violation of her privacy rights. The security company enlisted by the star's father telling the New York Times they are particularly proud of keeping Ms. Spears safe for so many years. An attorney for Jamie Spears insisted he operated within the parameters set by the court. Today's ruling could reveal if he did in fact follow the rules. Britney's attorney explained a new conservator could have access to Jamie's communications in the case, suggesting in a filing that's why Jamie instead hoped the conservatorship would be terminated entirely. The long legal journey spans more than a decade, Britney publicly condemning the conservatorship for the first time this summer, calling it abusive and traumatizing. Her testimony touching people from London to Los Angeles in the growing Free Britney movement.
I feel like everything has culminated to this point. All of the court proceedings, all the protesting, all of the posts online, everything came to a point today and we got what we wanted. Britney got what she wanted.
All right, Emily Ikeda joins us now from outside the courthouse in Los Angeles. And Emily, I know you have some more reporting on what the judge said about her decision to remove Jamie Spears as conservator.
That's right, Tom. The judge described the situation as not tenable and toxic, adding the suspension of Jamie Spears is in the best interest of the case. His replacement will remain in place at least until the termination hearing, which is expected to happen by the end of the year. Tom?
Emily Ikeda for us on that breaking news tonight. Emily, thank you for that. For a better legal understanding of what exactly happened in today's proceedings and what Britney's next steps are, we turn to attorney Angela Senadella, who joins us now in studio here on Top Story. She's been covering this for Top Story for us. So, Angela, you were telling me just moments ago you weren't surprised by this decision, but how monumental is this for Britney and, of course, the Free Britney movement?
Tom, this has changed everything. So Britney Spears is no longer the most terrified person in this story. That role goes to Jamie Spears, largely because in this case, the new conservator who has been appointed is a CPA and has the perfect experience and the access to go through all the past 13 years of data and see where every single dollar has been spent.
And you're saying this could be problems for her dad because he's been in control for 13 years, including those allegations of surveillance.
Hugely problematic.
Okay, so the new conservator, John Zabel, what do we know about him and how long will he be sort of in charge of Britney's affairs?
So we know that he's a CPA and he should actually only be going through the end of the year if indeed this conservatorship ends at that point. You know, we're not exactly sure because I do think there's one remaining piece, which is whether or not there will be a psychological evaluation ordered by the judge. And if that happens, then this might go longer.
And that's the big unknown, right? Can Britney take care of herself at this point? What have we learned over the last few years during this legal battle?
Well, we have learned that she at least believes that she can take care of herself. And finally, we know that her father believes so, too, because he's actually the one that first filed for the termination of this conservatorship. And the judge looks at both those parties.
And you think that there's no doubt that Jamie Spears' handling of Britney's money over the years and maybe other things will be looked into by someone?
Without a doubt. I mean, that's why they have an official CPA there who I believe has some sort of forensic investigator experience, which means he's trained and has the access to go back and look at every single penny.
Okay, Angela Senadella for us today on The Analysis. We thank you so much. If you're on TikTok, she's The Lawyer Angela. Huge following. Thanks so much for that, Angela. We also tonight have a medical alert we want to let you know about. The CDC is out with its strongest warning to date about pregnancy and COVID. New data shows it significantly raises the risk of death from the virus. NBC's Gabe Gutierrez has the latest on that and a vaccine mandate crackdown.
Tonight, a new urgent CDC health alert for pregnant women, urging them to get a COVID vaccine. New data show that symptomatic pregnant women have more than a twofold increased risk of requiring ICU admission and a 70% increased risk of death.
The impact of the COVID-19 disease on pregnancy can be profound in a negative way. On the woman who's pregnant herself is at high risk for a severe outcome for COVID for her. The negative impact on the fetus is also very clear right now.
Only around 1 in 3 pregnant women nationwide are vaccinated right now. Across the country, public health officials are stepping up their push and in some cases requirements to force people to get the shot. Mark Bishovsky is a respiratory therapist in Minnesota.
We had signs outside of our hospital, "I was a hero." Right now, I feel expendable.
He's now one of more than 180 healthcare workers in the state suing their employers to stop vaccine mandates.
To me, really irresponsible to put this mandate in place without accommodations for the people that have already had COVID and for the folks that have religious exemptions.
Today, YouTube said it was banning all anti-vaccine misinformation from its platform, reigniting a heated debate over free speech, censorship, and public safety as more companies hit vaccination deadlines. United Airlines says it's firing nearly 600 employees for refusing to get vaccinated. The pilots' union is furious.
It's just a matter of choice. Now, I'm vaccinated. I believe in the vaccine, but I also believe in people's opportunity to decide whether to get vaccinated.
United CEO says travel won't be impacted.
Such a small percentage, and we planned and prepared for this.
But in upstate New York, where a vaccine mandate for healthcare workers took effect this week, some doctors are already sounding the alarm about a staffing shortage.
It is absolutely a staffing crisis. There's no question about it. It's real.
Those staffing shortages are a problem in hospitals all across the country. Gabe Gutierrez joins us now from a hospital here in Manhattan. And Gabe, you talked about a lot of states there in your report, and there was some resistance in New York to a vaccine mandate for healthcare workers. But when you look at the numbers here, how many are actually vaccinated?
Yeah, Tom, the governor now says that 92% of healthcare workers in this state have now gotten at least one dose. That number has gone up significantly in the last few weeks, and that's proof, she says, that the mandate is working. However, thousands of healthcare workers will be out of a job, and some hospitals say they can't afford that when they're being slammed with patients. Tom?
Okay, Gabe, we thank you for that. A lot of new COVID developments tonight, and to help us understand it all, let's bring in NBC News medical contributor Dr. Natalie Azar. So, Dr. Azar, I want to start with that headline on pregnant women because, listen, we're sensitive to the fact that women who are pregnant are so careful and cautious about what they put into their body. But the findings and the recommendations are pretty clear on this one, right?
They are clear. And listen, I'm a mom. You know, anytime you do anything when you're pregnant, you always want to, double and triple check everything. And really, the stats here speak for themselves. Over 250,000 women in this country pregnant women have been infected with COVID-19. We now know, since the beginning of the pandemic, that they are more than 2 times as likely to end up in the ICU. And there's a 70% increased risk of dying from COVID-19. But it's not just the mom. There's also a potential harm to the unborn baby in the way of an increased risk of being born a stillbirth, as well as a preterm delivery, which is a big deal because if a newborn baby ends up in the NICU and then can potentially get COVID on top of that could be obviously a devastating scenario. As a preemie, that would be horrific. Yeah.
There's also a headline out from Bloomberg, and I want to be clear here, NBC News has not confirmed this, but there is talk that if a Moderna booster comes out, it may be half the dosage. And even though we have not confirmed this yet, we spoke about this, it could potentially make sense, right?
It absolutely could. Look, the active ingredient in the Pfizer versus the Moderna vaccine It's 30 microgram in the Pfizer, and it's 100 micrograms in the Moderna vaccine. That's significantly
so the Moderna
higher.
has more. People who got that, they got more of the dosage.
The Moderna has more, and there's also a thought that perhaps the waiting 4 weeks between the two doses, as opposed to 3 weeks, might be the reason or the explanation that there might be a little bit more durability with the Moderna vaccine than with the Pfizer in general. But what's good about this, we have data actually that the half dose gives people a totally adequate response, and we get more vaccine that way. Okay. So if you just think not even for our U.S. supply, but globally, if Moderna can manufacture these half-dose boosters, we can essentially vaccinate and boost twice as many people.
Okay, good news to hear, especially considering some people at this table may have gotten the Moderna vaccine. So, Dr. Azar, thanks so much for that. We really do appreciate that. Okay, for the second day in a row, the Pentagon's top military leaders on Capitol Hill facing tough questions about the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan. Today admitting it has opened the door to a resurgence of both ISIS and al-Qaeda terrorists. Courtney Kuby has that report for us tonight.
Tonight, the nation's top military brass with a stunning warning on the growing terror threat following the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan.
It's a real possibility in a not too distant future, 6, 12, 18, 24, 36 months, that kind of time frame, for reconstitution of al-Qaeda or ISIS.
That, as for a second straight day, Joint Chiefs Chairman General Mark Milley, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, and CENTCOM Commander General Frank McKenzie were grilled over the chaotic exit, leaving Americans and Afghan allies behind, now in danger of Taliban violence.
Frankly, they're being slaughtered right now as we speak with our weapons, with our damn equipment. Our allies are being slaughtered.
Milley was challenged about his phone call during the Trump administration with a Chinese general who he reportedly told, if we're going to attack, I'm going to call you ahead of time.
I think you articulating that you would tell him, you would give him a call, I think is worthy of your resignation.
I would never tip off any enemy to any kind of surprise thing that we were going to do.
Congresswoman Liz Cheney came to his defense.
For any American to question your loyalty to our nation is despicable. I want to apologize for those members of this committee who've done so.
Some intense moments there in that House hearing. Courtney Kuby joins us now from the Pentagon. Courtney, there's also another headline we're following tonight. I want to ask you about the Marine Corps officer who was relieved of his command a few days after posting a viral video in August calling out his superiors over the botched withdrawal from Afghanistan. Here's a little bit of that.
I want to say this very strongly. I have been fighting for 17 years. I am willing to throw it all away to say to my senior leaders, I demand accountability.
So that was back in August. Now, Lieutenant Colonel Scheller's father is saying his son is in military lockup, writing on LinkedIn, quote, he was issued a gag order, which he broke this weekend by posting on social media. Courtney, what do we know about this case?
Yeah, that's right. He's in pretrial confinement right now. And what he did was post a video on social media that went viral, more than 1 million views last time we checked. But why this is frowned upon by the military is he was speaking out against his civilian chain of command while in uniform. It is something that is generally not done. He's now facing charges of disobeying his a lawful order, of conduct on becoming an officer. And I think what our viewers really need to know about this case, Tom, is that he has 17 years in the Marine Corps. He's now talking about resigning his commission. What that means is that when a military officer reaches 20 years, they are eligible for retirement and all the benefits that go along with that. He is saying that he feels so strongly about the way that the withdrawal from Afghanistan was handled and about the death of those 13 service members that he's willing to give up those benefits, what he has worked for 17 years to earn, in order to speak out and to demand that someone be held accountable, Tom.
Courtney Kuby with that new reporting on that case tonight. Courtney, we thank you for that. We take you now to Haiti, where planes packed with deported Haitian migrants are arriving daily. Almost 6,000 in the last 10 days. The United Nations now stepping in to help ease the chaos, but it might not be enough. NBC's Jacob Soboroff is there.
This plane, the first of 4 to arrive in Port-au-Prince today, carrying Haitian migrants. The busiest day yet for the Biden administration, expelling thousands of Haitians gathered under that bridge in Del Rio, Texas. Once they arrive at this airport, many of them are confused. Many of them are asking why they are here in the first place. Their next stop, this processing center run by the United Nations, which expects by the end of today as many as 6,000 Haitians to have been returned since September 19th. On this bus right here are migrants who were just taken off of the plane, and they're basically going to be put through a United Nations repatriation program right now. They're going to get instructions on what to do once they arrive here in Haiti. One family returned today told us they'll try again to leave the poorest nation in the Western Hemisphere, one they and many of the migrants haven't lived in for years.
We want to live somewhere we can have a better life.
The UN's chief of mission for migration issues here says it's dangerous for returning migrants.
My main concern is that a lot of people, thousands of people, will be in areas that are controlled by the gangs, that are affected by the earthquake or in other difficult situations, and the more come here, the more difficult the situation will be.
Jacob Sobroff joins us now from Port-au-Prince. And Jacob, the sad reality is that some of these migrants, they haven't lived in Haiti for nearly a decade, and now they're forced to move back over there, and they may have nowhere to go.
The question you essentially hear, Tom, at the airport is, what do I do? Some folks don't have family here any longer. People who do may not know how to get to them or may not be able to reach them through gang-controlled territory here in Port-au-Prince or in other parts of the country, and that sets up this dilemma. It also calls into question whether or not the Biden administration is creating the fair, safe, and humane immigration system that they had said during the campaign that they wanted to establish, and these migrants on the ground say they're evidence of that.
Jacob, I know when you cover these types of stories, people are in their most chaotic point probably in their lives, and they open up to you, and you were able to meet and speak with a family?
Yeah, I was, Tom. A young family who had been living in Chile for the past several years. They made their way through multiple countries to the Mexican border because they believed they'd be able to get into the country under a Joe Biden administration. They were there with their young 3-year-old daughter. And to me, the saddest part in talking to them was not necessarily that they were back here in Haiti, but that they were ready to leave Haiti again because they didn't see a future for themselves here in this country.
Jacob Sobroff with the harsh realities there in Haiti. Jacob, thank you. Still ahead on Top Story, chilling new details in the disappearance of Mia Marcano. Authorities revealing a master key was used to enter her apartment before she vanished, and the person who had that key is now dead. Plus, the disturbing video of a deaf man being tased by police when he could not hear their commands. His fight for justice tonight. And the wild scene caught on camera in Florida, how one man used his trash can to capture an alligator. You're watching Top Story. We're just getting started. Next, another disappearance making headlines. Florida teen Mia Marcano still hasn't been found. 5 days later, what officials are revealing about the case now. Kerry Sanders has more.
Tonight, 19-year-old Florida college student Mia Marcano missing. Her family holding out hope 5 days after she vanished.
I know you're alive. I know you're out there.
On Monday, Orange County deputies identified Armando Manuel Caballero as a person of interest in Marcano's disappearance, but Caballero was later found dead.
Earlier today, Armando Caballero was found dead at an apartment complex in Seminole County. It appears he has killed himself.
Marcano's family says Mia had rebuffed several romantic advances from Caballero. They both worked at the Arden Villas apartments. Investigators say he was in her home just before she was finishing her shift.
We now know that a maintenance-issued master key fob, which Caballero was known to be in possession of, was used to enter Mia's apartment Friday afternoon. At about 4:30, this would have been about 30 minutes before she finished her shift at the apartment complex.
The Valencia College sophomore was supposed to visit family in Fort Lauderdale last Friday, but missed her flight. Marcano's family now fears the worst.
We love you. You know our family is strong. You know our family is big. You know we will never sleep one night until we get you home. We miss you. We know that you're strong.
Last night, dozens gathered at the Arden Villas apartments to hold a candlelight vigil. The crowd emotional as they prayed for her safe return. Officials now pleading with the public for help.
No bit of information is too small or too insignificant. If someone, knows of something, saw something, recognizes her face, we will take that information, and you can remain anonymous too. We just want the information to try and find Mia.
All right, Kerry Sanders joins us now live from Fort Lauderdale. The family has been very outspoken, Kerry, from the beginning. They remain hopeful, but there's also something else they want tonight, correct?
Late this afternoon, they announced that they would like to see the FBI get involved. They say that that is not because they don't believe that the Orange County Sheriff's Office is doing a good job, or now the Seminole County Sheriff's Office appears to have joined in searching waterways, possibly for evidence, but they believe the FBI can bring resources to the case that the local Sheriff's Department does not have. But at the end of the day, the FBI generally does not get involved unless there's evidence of crossing state lines. And at this point, that evidence, if it exists, has not been shared publicly. Tom?
Carrie Sanders with the latest on the search there for Mia Marcano. Carrie, we thank you for that. Coming up, the multi-billion-dollar mess. Have you heard about this one? Why some Americans who received unemployment benefits are being asked to give that money back, and what you can do if you get that letter. And the explosion bringing down part of an apartment building in Dallas, what firefighters were doing there moments before the blast. Stay with us. Back now with Top Stories news feed, a roundup of what's making headlines across the country. And we begin tonight with the gas explosion at an apartment building in Dallas. Take a look at this. Firefighters investigating a natural gas leak when the explosion took place. The blast causing a partial collapse of one building and sending debris flying into the air. 4 firefighters and 3 civilians hospitalized. At least 3 of the firefighters in critical condition tonight. All residents are accounted for. And 2 students injured in a stabbing at a high school in Annapolis, Maryland. Police say the students were stabbed when a large fight broke out. School resource officers able to disarm the attacker. The violence prompting a temporary lockdown. At least 7 students now facing charges. Both victims expected to be okay. And an update tonight on NBA players who refuse to get vaccinated. A league spokesperson saying any players who do not comply with local vaccine mandates will not be paid for the games they miss. The NBA says 90% of players are fully vaccinated, but the rule will mainly affect teams in New York and San Francisco, where executive orders require players to be vaccinated. YouTube is cracking down on anti-vaccine misinformation. The company announcing it is expanding its policies to block content that includes false claims and conspiracy theories about all approved vaccines, not just those for COVID-19. The video giant also banning the accounts of several prominent anti-vaccine activists, including Robert F. Kennedy Jr. And the Florida man using a trash can to capture an alligator. New video showing the man trying to coax the gator into the can outside of a home. After a few failed attempts, the animal enters the bin. The man then pulls it upright and holds down the lid. The video viewed more than 3 million times, of course, on social media. However, officials are urging residents not to try and capture gators on their own and instead call wildlife experts or animal control. All right, next tonight, you can hear the pain and hysteria in the police body cam footage. A Colorado man who is deaf, repeatedly tasered by officers who say they didn't realize he couldn't hear them. He would end up spending more than 4 months in jail, and now he's looking for justice. NBC News Now correspondent Vaughn Hilliard has the jarring video and a warning. The footage you're about to see is graphic.
This audio stunning to listen to.
Arms behind your back right now, I'm gonna tase you. Tase it.
A deaf man tased by 2 Colorado police officers in 2019, now suing, seeking compensation for physical and emotional harm.
I'm sorry.
Brady Mystic heard moaning after officers say they pulled him over for allegedly running a stop sign. Mystic then exited his car.
Sit back in your car. Sit back in your car. Run up on us like that? Excuse me? Who do you think you are?
The altercation then begins.
Stop.
The officer's body cam footage detailing every minute.
Hands behind your back. Put your hands behind your back.
After Mystic is tased, he can be heard repeatedly trying to tell the officers that he is deaf.
Stop, dude.
One of the officers realizing the situation.
It should be an attempt to establish a rapport and communication, some sort of baseline of understanding so that the citizen knows what's going on and the officer knows what's going on.
Mystic was jailed for 4 months, charged for assaulting an officer and resisting arrest. The police statement saying the officer's actions were deemed to be appropriate. This footage shows Mystic trying to explain the incident after.
I thought maybe it was leaving someone else. I didn't know that I was the one. I didn't know what the reason was.
Okay, Vaughn joins us now here in studio upstairs on a different floor. Vaughn, you know, what happened with the charges here in the case?
Exactly. Those charges were pending for nearly 2 years before they were finally dropped by the district attorney just this summer. That footage was sent to us by the attorney for Mr. Mystic here, and that is part of why this lawsuit is now being filed almost 2 years later. They're filing it against not only the city, the police force, but also those 2 officers, saying that there is unreasonable search and seizure. There is also a misuse of law enforcement tactics under the Americans with Disabilities Act. These are just some of the areas in which the lawsuit for Mr. Mystic is being filed here.
Yeah, so, and you mentioned the officers there. What's the current status of those officers?
One of the officers, Tom, is still with the force, but the other was actually let go. He was terminated, Nicholas Hanning, just a few months ago for a different incident of excessive force. He was let go by that department for tasering an individual who was 75 years old and was not carrying a weapon at that time. Tom?
Okay, Vaughn Hilliard in 30 Rock, on a floor I will visit one day. All right, Vaughn, thank you for that. We want to turn now to Money Talks, what consumers and investors need to know from the business world and beyond. States across the country are now demanding many Americans who received unemployment benefits give that money back. In some cases, tens of thousands of dollars. And it's shaping up to be a multi-billion-dollar mess. Dasha Burns has a story.
Here we go. Michelle Gallagher was shocked when Connecticut sent her a bill for more than $20,000.
I couldn't believe it.
The single mom and small business owner applied for and got unemployment benefits back in April 2020 after the pandemic shuttered her bridal shop.
How important was that money? It was very important because I had to provide for myself and my 2 children and pay the bills.
But now the state of Connecticut wants $23,328 back.
Are you able to pay that back? Oh God, no. How can they ask that back? Because they made a mistake. I don't understand it.
And it's not just Connecticut. Millions of Americans across the country could be in the same boat. About $794 billion have been handed out in combined state and federal unemployment assistance since the start of the pandemic. Cash for Americans like Michelle, who never before had qualified for unemployment.
States put together new programs in a couple of weeks.
But in the rush to get dollars out the door, states and applicants made mistakes.
So what has happened over the last year is states have had to course correct. And they've had to go back to claimants and say, which one of these reasons were you unemployed for each week that you were unemployed? And so if claimants didn't answer those questions, they'll get a notice in the mail that they were overpaid for those weeks.
Overpayments are common in unemployment programs, but the volume of applications during the pandemic has created a huge backlog.
There are millions and millions of people in the backlog right now. And, it's terrifying.
So mistakes that used to be caught quickly.
So what would normally take a few weeks
is taking a year or over a year.
Attorney Nadine Nevins helps unemployment recipients in Connecticut navigate the complicated appeals process. But most Americans don't have this kind of legal assistance and could face wage garnishments and more.
I think people are going to give up and they're going to have this overpayment and their tax refund is going to be intercepted.
The Connecticut Department of Labor tells NBC News that during the pandemic, they had 10 times the usual number of applicants, that they're making every effort to help people resolve issues, and, quote, waivers are most often granted on economic grounds when it's against equity and good conscience to have an overpayment repaid. People like Michelle are now finding that a lifeline has turned into an anchor.
You said when you first got that unemployment, it's money you needed, you viewed it as a blessing. Mm-hmm. How do you view it now? As a curse. If I didn't have that money, I wouldn't be sitting here now worried about paying it back.
All right, Dasha Burns joins us now on set. Dasha, so many questions about this. The pandemic, COVID-19, it's been such a confusing time for so many of us, but there's a reason why states sort of aren't giving people a pass on this. There might be some fraud involved.
Yeah, it's a really important question, Tom, and it's one that I asked Michelle Evermore, who's a top official in the Federal Department of Labor, and she said that they are granting waivers to the extent legally possible, but there is the other side of the coin here, the fraud that you mentioned. They don't want to leave the system vulnerable to criminals trying to exploit the system. But I'll say that some states have been a little bit more generous about granting
granting waivers. Michigan, for example, granted a blanket waiver to about 700,000 people because the state itself made a clerical error on the application form, Tom.
700,000?
That's right.
And they receive money?
They don't have to pay back the money.
Okay. So here's another question for you. What happens if you get one of these letters?
Yeah, you're probably terrified and confused. Well, the Department of Labor says first, don't panic. They said to appeal, to apply for a waiver, no matter how long the process takes. But Tom, some experts do tell us that this could potentially take years to clean up the process. The federal government is sending teams to these states to help deal with this unprecedented problem. But the problem at the end of the day, Tom, is the onus is still on the individual to take action. And the lawyers and the advocates we've been talking to say that that's not exactly fair.
Yeah, and by and large, most people needed the money, obviously. All right, Dasha, thank you so much for that. We want to turn now to Top Stories Global Watch, a look at what's making headlines around the world. Chilling new details emerging in the sentencing trial for a former London police officer accused of killing Sarah Everest. Prosecutors saying Wayne Couzens used his police ID and handcuffs to get the 33-year-old into his car, telling her she had violated COVID-19 restrictions. Couzens admitting to then raping and murdering her. Everest's death last March sparked global protests over violence against women. The alarming report finding World Health Organization staffers sexually abused women and girls during the Ebola crisis. The independent investigation finding dozens of victims who were sexually exploited and abused in the Democratic Republic of Congo for 2 years. At least 21 of the perpetrators were employed by the WHO during the Ebola outbreak. They have since been terminated. The organization's director today calling it, quote, a dark day for the WHO. And in the Americas, the deadly prison riot in Ecuador. New video showing inmates on the roof of the jail in Guayaquil. Authorities say rival gangs exchanged gunfire and hurled grenades at each other and guards. At least 30 inmates killed, including multiple people who were decapitated. It's the third deadly prison riot in the country this year. Coming up, the potential breakthrough for those with addiction. This is an incredible story. The new brain surgery that could help people get and stay sober. Our team with an up-close look at the procedure and what one patient told us about his recovery. Kate Snow, coming up on Top Story. Stay with us. Back now with a possible breakthrough in the fight against addiction. We got a first look at a new type of brain surgery that could help people recover from substance abuse disorders. It's only been done 3 times in this country, and we were there for the latest one. Here's Kate Snow with this NBC News exclusive.
You could help a lot of people if this goes well.
Yeah.
James Fisher has been using drugs for more than half of his 36 years.
How did you end up getting drawn to drugs in the first place?
From my social anxiety. I discovered Xanax super early in high school.
In his 20s, he looked like a different person, moved to painkillers and heroin, has been in treatment a dozen times, and even sober doesn't feel right.
I feel like I'm flat right now.
How do you mean flat? Not happy, not sad,
Not
just
happy,
sort of
not
this?
sad, just in the middle. No emotions whatsoever.
When we met at the West Virginia University Rockefeller Neuroscience Institute, James was about to be the 3rd person in America to have an experimental brain surgery that doctors hope could be the key to overcoming his substance abuse.
I mean, I'm getting holes drilled into my brain. Like, it's scary.
Why are you willing to do that?
Because I don't want to die.
So that's James, this is his brain.
Dr. Ali Rezai and his team mapped James's brain to find the exact paths to implant 2 wires carrying brain-stimulating electrodes.
So if you're off by a millimeter, you're in the wrong spot.
A kind of brain pacemaker implanted in the chest sends electrical impulses to the reward center deep in the brain.
The brain becomes sensitized, this reward center of the brain, so you keep on wanting to experience that initial feeling to feel good from the dopamine high. So our goal is to regulate that or normalize the dopamine imbalance in the brain.
Other signals are sent to the frontal lobe,
where decision-making happens.
That's right, exactly.
Long-term planning.
Long-term planning, the goal is to activate the frontal lobes more so you can be more in charge of your behaviors and make better decisions.
We watched Dr. Rezai implant the first wire.
How deep is the electrode?
It's about 5 centimeters.
Then they woke James and tested the device.
What are you feeling? Any change you're noticing overall for you? Happier.
Showing him photos of drugs and measuring his cravings.
How about just go through heroin craving? What would be in the most ever?
I feel like I don't need to be happy right now, so we're getting around 30.
This is where you're living now?
Yep.
At Sober Living?
Sober Living House.
We caught up with James 4 weeks after surgery.
How you doing?
I'm doing good. Great. Fantastic.
Feel weird at all, or?
No, I don't feel weird. I'm just not depressed, not anxious, not irritable. Nothing gets on my nerves.
James says he felt an immediate difference.
It's like somebody covered you up with a warm blanket, you know, and just the feeling of everything's okay. I used to have a really hard time making decisions.
You feel more clear now?
Yeah.
He's been sober 3.5 months, now living in the same home where Jared Buckhalter, the first person to get this surgery, works.
So I'm coming up on 2 years of continuous sobriety.
The only other person to have the surgery relapsed. But for Jared and James, the brain stimulation is helping them stick with the work of recovery.
Has your personality changed at all?
I don't know, because I really didn't know who I was before. I've never had a substantial amount of clean time to really nail down who am I.
Without drugs?
Yeah. So this is, you know, the longest I've been clean in a while, and I'm just starting to figure out who I am.
And Kate Snow joins us now. Kate, this is such a fascinating story. So only 3 people in America have been part of this study, as we learned in your report there. How were they chosen, and are there any plans to bring in more?
Yes, so this is a very small early study, Tom, and they were chosen because of how severe their situations were. So the 3 that have had it so far, you know, have been struggling for years and years with substance use disorder. And you heard James say, you know, he'd been in and out of treatment programs. At this point, they're going to do a 4th patient as part of this small study, and then they hope to take that data and show that it was safe and potentially effective, and that then they'll get permission to do a larger, more controlled study that would be outside of West Virginia, nationwide.
You know, Kate, drug addiction is so serious, and so is brain surgery. We saw in the report how they can't be off by even a millimeter. So how risky is this kind of surgery?
It is risky. I asked Dr. Rezai about that. He says, look, there's a 1% chance of a serious, you know, terrible outcome. You could die in this surgery. But when I was talking to James, who you just met, he said, I'm going to take my chances because 1% chance of dying on the operating table versus this is his words, I'm probably going to overdose. I'm probably going to die of my substance use. So he took that chance.
Right. Kate Snow with such an amazing story tonight. Kate, we thank you for that. And when we come back, reaching new heights, the 9 mountain climbers looking to become the first all-black and brown team to summit Mount Everest. Their inspiring journey. You're going to meet them. Coming up next. Finally tonight, meet the 9 mountain climbers looking to become the first all-black and brown expedition to summit the world's tallest mountain and hopefully inspire a few people along the way. Many have had the dream, but few have had the courage to reach the peak of Mount Everest.
You know, climbing Everest is hard, no matter which way you put it.
Philip Henderson is determined to be part of this elite group. The Colorado climbing instructor is part of an expedition called Full Circle Everest. The group now out to shift perceptions of what a mountain climber can look like. Since Edmund Hillary and Tenzin Norgay first reached the peak in 1953, just over 6,000 climbers have been able to reach Everest's peak. Less than 10 of them have been black. What does Full Circle mean?
I really recognized back in the early 90s that there was a lack of representation in the outdoors. There's so few of us that we're kind of, you know, obligated in a sense and bound that we should be kind of, you know, bringing everything that we've learned and that we know in that experience and come full circle and kind of, you know, reach and pull someone forward.
The 9 climbers hail from all walks of life and from all across the country. A high school chemistry teacher from Colorado, an Iraq war veteran from New York. All of them bound by a common goal, to conquer the world's tallest peak and to change a few attitudes along the way.
Just because it's a group of black people doing it doesn't mean that we aren't necessarily unskilled or we don't belong there. And so I think just showing that we belong there on the mountain and is motivation enough.
If successful, the expedition will be the first entirely black and brown team to summit Everest.
Hopefully, we help folks realize it's challenging, but it's possible, and it's accessible to all.
The group has already met its fundraising goal, crowdsourcing more than $50,000 to secure permits for their climb next spring.
certainly what inspires me is all the people out there who are supporting us.
Now, all that's left, the daunting task of preparing for one of the world's most challenging physical feats. What's your advice to your fellow climbers here and your team when it gets really cold up there?
When it gets cold, put on some clothes. Make sure you stay warm. You know, you don't let yourself get cold. Like, just keep putting one foot in front of the other. You just got to stay motivated to just keep moving forward.
Stay warm. We will be following Full Circle. Thanks so much for watching tonight. I'm Tom Llamas in New York. Good night.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.